Chapter 4. 10 Days to Pack. Yuki came home from school one day to find Mother sitting, Japanese fashion, on a cushion in the middle of her bedroom floor. She was surrounded by boxes and cartons containing old letters, notebooks, photographs, and papers that had been stored in her closet for years. "What in the world are you doing?" Yuki asked. Mother scarcely looked up. "I suppose I must throw them out," she said sadly. "They're old letters from your grandmother and aunts, an uncle and aunts in Japan." She shuffled through some papers and held up some crayon drawings. "Look, you did these in first grade," she explained. "And here are some by Kenichi. I just couldn't throw them out." There were boxes full of diaries, too, and assorted scraps of paper on which Mother had scribbled her 31-syllable Japanese poem. Yuki felt dizzy on Mother's behalf. "You'll never finish in time, Mama," she sighed. "What will you do?" There was nothing Mother could do but keep sorting and tearing up and throwing out. "I'll just have to keep working until I finish," she said simply. The evacuation hung over their heads now like the blade of the guillotine. No one knew just when it would take place, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. One of these days the army would say, "Now." They would have to be ready. Already there was an 8 p.m. curfew for all Japanese, and they were forbidden to travel more than 5 miles from home. Shortwave radios, cameras, binoculars, and firearms were designated as contraband, and Ken had taken all their cameras, even Yuki's old box camera and Dad's field glasses, to the Berkeley police station. Mother was anxious to observe every letter of the law. As soon as it was required that enemy aliens register, she had gone immediately to get registered. Ken, too, had registered at the Civil Control Station as head of their family. He had come home with a handful of baggage tags, which were to be put on everything they would be taking into camp. "Look," he said, tossing the tags on the table. "From now on, we're family number 13453. The house soon began to look as though a hurricane had swept through it. Mother sold the living room and dining room furniture by putting a furniture for sale sign up in the window. Ken rolled up the rugs and took down all the pictures on the walls. Decisions had to be made about everything in the house. What were they to do with the piano, the writing desk, Mother's sewing machine and cabinets, the beds and bureaus and chests, Father's golf clubs, Yuki's doll collection, Ken's record player and all his records, the washing machine, the bedding, the china and silver and linens, the coffee table, the lamps. Yuki didn't know what poor Mother was going to do with it all. There seemed to be enough in their house to fill up all of Beacon's van in storage and still have some left over. Mother made dozens of lists and often misplaced half of them. She decided all the large items would go into commercial storage. The rest of their belongings were spread around in the basements and attics and garages of various friends in Berkeley, like orphan children being distributed to concerned relatives. Their neighbors took as much as they could, and the rest went to families they didn't even know, for members of some of the Berkeley churches had offered storage space in their homes to help the evacuating Japanese. Yuki had her own small problems, which seemed large enough at the time. She had to decide what to put in the trunks going to storage, what to throw out, and what to take with her into camp. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly decide to make changes, such as tucking Mrs. Jameson's pearl ring safely into the storage trunk instead of into her camp suitcase. "Remember," Ken cautioned, "we're only supposed to take whatever we can carry. That means no more than 2 suitcases each." "Okay," Yuki said, nodding. And every once in a while, she would try lifting her 2 suitcases to see if she could carry them herself. But as she added to them, day by day, they soon grew so heavy she could scarcely lift them off the floor. Eventually, she didn't even bother trying to lift them. Ken would simply have to help her. Mother had an even bigger problem. Spread out in one corner of her room was an enormous canvas rucksack, which she called the Going to Camp Bundle. She had bought it for the blankets and bedding that they were required to take into camp with them, but gradually she began to fill it with all sorts of odds and ends that wouldn't fit in her suitcases. Now it held the dishes and utensils they were also supposed to take to camp, as well as an electric hot plate, a kettle, a teapot, a can of tea, a hot water bottle, a thermos, 2 flashlights, rubber boots, and umbrellas, and a small bed lamp. Already the bundle was beginning to bulge wildly in all directions, growing each day like some living creature. Every once in a while, Ken would look at it, anxiously saying, "I'll never make it into camp if I have to carry that enormous thing." But Mother couldn't stop adding to it. "There's just no other place to put all the things we'll need," she said plaintively. And because Ken knew she was right, he watched in silence as the bundle grew bigger and bigger, dreading the day he would have to stagger into camp with it. After a while, neither Ken nor Mother spoke of how they would manage getting the bundle into camp. It was something that would just have to happen. There was another problem that none of them wanted to discuss, but one evening it was Mother who brought it up. "We'll have to find a home for Pepper soon," she said softly to Yuki. "You know we can't wait much longer." Yuki nodded. She knew something had to be done, and very soon. Mimi couldn't take him because she already had a big German shepherd and 3 guinea pigs. Mrs. Jameson was taking Old Salt, but couldn't manage Pepper because of her lame leg. "I'm not leaving Pepper with anybody I don't know," Yuki said firmly. "He'll be lonesome enough as it is." The difficulty was, however, that most of their friends were going into camp with them, and if they weren't, they already had pets of their own. Mother looked troubled, but she knew how much Pepper meant to Yuki. "Well, perhaps a good idea will come to us soon," she said, and she put off the decision for another day. Secretly, Yuki hoped both Mother and Ken would overlook the whole problem, and then maybe she could simply pick Pepper up and carry him into camp as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe, in all the excitement, no one would even notice. More and more, Ken was taking over as head of the house. Father signed the car over to him so it could be sold, and Ken was now able to withdraw money from Father's account. He made arrangements to buy war bonds and signed up for self-defense. Still, that hadn't given him the right to do what he did, Yuki thought, for one day he made a decision about Pepper without even asking her. He simply said, "I found the perfect solution for Pepper. I put an ad in the Daily Cal at the university. Someone will want him, and he'll be happy living with somebody my age. Okay?" "No, it's not okay," Yuki shouted angrily. "You didn't even ask me." "If I asked you, you would have said no, right?" Yuki had to admit that she most certainly would have. "Well then," Ken went on, "what would be your solution?" I'm, well, I thought, I'm going to smuggle him into camp," Yuki said limply. Ken didn't even give her solution a second thought. "It's settled then," he said quietly. "We'll make sure Pepper goes to a nice person. We'll all decide that together." Ken did keep his word about that. Each time anyone came to see Pepper, he made sure that Yuki was there to meet him. Neither of them liked the first 2 boys who came. The first talked too much, and the second wanted Pepper for a fraternity house mascot. The third boy was a quiet, sandy-haired sophomore named Andy. He had just lost his own dog and had been wanting another in his place. "I live right here in Berkeley. I could write you in camp to let you know how Pepper's doing," he said eagerly. His voice was gentle, and Yuki saw how Pepper wagged his tail and licked his hand when Andy went to pet him. "Okay, Yuki?" Yuki nodded. She gave Pepper one final hug and then ran into the house. She didn't want to stay and watch while Ken gave Andy Pepper's brush and comb and feeding dish. She hurried to her room and lay on her bed, covering her hands over her ears so she wouldn't hear Andy's car as it drove away with Pepper. Mother made her favorite barbecue spare ribs for supper, but Yuki could scarcely eat. "I hate this whole stupid evacuation," she said grimly, and she ran outside, forgetting there would be no Pepper to come bounding up the steps to greet her. She went to the fish pond and threw pebbles into it, watching the old gray carp appear from beneath the lily pads, opening his mouth for something to eat. But tonight, he didn't amuse her at all. Yuki stood there watching until it was too dark to see, biting her lip to keep back the tears. As the house grew emptier, the garden seemed to grow more and more beautiful with spring flowers. The flowering cherry looked like a pale pink cloud, and the peach trees blossomed like clusters of white popcorn. In the midst of their frantic packing, Yuki sometimes found Mother looking out the window and scribbling a poem on a scrap of paper. Yuki wished she could write poetry too. She was filled with indescribable feelings these days, but she couldn't find the right words to put them down on paper. It was like having an ache deep down inside, but not being able to tell anyone just where it was. Mother seldom spoke of her aches or sadness, and rarely let anyone see her shed a tear, but she could make people understand how she felt by putting the right words in the fragile shell of poetry. "You're truly a gifted and sensitive poet," Mr. Toda said admiringly. Mother scoffed, saying, "You're simply a biased and kind friend, Toda-san." But Yuki knew she was pleased. Mother felt almost as strongly about her plants as Yuki had about Pepper. She couldn't bear to leave her favorite plants for strangers who would come after they left. She dug up her London smoke carnation, the yellow calla lilies, and the Berkshire climbing rose, and gave them to Miss Jameson and Miss Nelson. A few of Father's prize bonsai went to the minister of the Congregational Church. "I'll take good care of them and return them whenever you come back," he promised. Some of Father's best gladiolas, however, went to a woman from up the block whom they scarcely knew. She appeared one day with a carton and a trowel and asked if she could have them. "I thought you wouldn't mind," she explained, "since you're leaving anyway." Yuki didn't want her to have them, but Mother said it didn't matter. "Let her have them, if they'll make her happy," she said. Ken called her a vulture. "She's as bad as the people in San Pedro who were buying refrigerators for $5 and cards for $25 from the Japanese who have to go first," he said bitterly. On April 21st, 1942, the headline in the Berkeley paper read, "Japs given evacuation orders here." Yuki shivered as she read it. "I wish they'd stop calling us Japs," she murmured. But that was the least of her problems now. The Army had finally issued the order that said all Japanese in Berkeley must evacuate their homes. They were to report to Tanforan Assembly Center by noon on May 1st. "That gives us exactly 10 days, Ken said nervously. "Think we can make it, Mom?" "We'll have to make it, Kenichi," Mother said calmly. And she poured his coffee and Yuki's hot chocolate. "Eat your breakfast now," she said to them. "Evacuation orders or not, we still have to eat."